We're now going to turn to keynote remarks. It's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Ann Patterson, the United States Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. Ambassador Patterson is one of those rare diplomats who doesn't hesitate to go where angels fear to tread. From her earlier days in trouble spots like El Salvador and Colombia, when I first got to know her, to more recent assignments in Pakistan and Egypt, Ambassador Patterson has always tackled her work with unfailing dedication and stamina. We were very happy to have her with us at the annual Saban Forum on U.S.-Israeli relations last December in Washington as she awaited her confirmation from the United States Senate. And we welcome her here today on her first official visit to Qatar as the new Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Ambassador Patterson.
Thank you, Ted, for your kind introduction. And thanks to our friends at Brookings for inviting me to speak today. Let me recognize Prime Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Nasser bin Khalifa Al Thani and Foreign Minister Dr. Khalid bin Mohammed Al Attiyah. I am very glad to be here today and to bring best regards from Secretary Kerry. I know the Secretary of State is in very constant contact with Foreign Minister Attiyah and keeps his number on his own cell phone. Your Excellencies Bujar Nishani, President of Albania, and Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, President of Mali, I was very pleased to meet you here today. Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin by expressing the gratitude of the United States to the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and his government for their diplomatic efforts that made it possible to free U.S. Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl from years of captivity with the Taliban. I was the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan when Sergeant Bergdahl was taken prisoner and am very familiar with this case and the strong commitment of our leadership to securing his freedom. As a mother of two sons who served or are serving in the U.S. military, I also took great personal comfort in seeing firsthand that my government would do everything possible to bring back our servicemen and women to their families. The deal could not have been achieved without the government of Qatar's diplomatic good offices and its firm commitment to securing the 5 individuals after their transfer from the Guantanamo Bay facility. I understand that the first plenary session will consider the future of the U.S. role in the region. I look forward to this discussion as we prepare for significant changes in the next year. As you are likely aware, last month President Barack Obama announced the plan that will bring an end to the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan, a war that has gone on for 12 years. The United States has lost 6,812 lives and suffered 52,032 wounded in our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. These wars have already cost the American people more than $1.6 trillion, although some analysts believe the final cost will be far greater. As a result, it won't surprise you that there is an active debate underway in the United States about the way we engage with the world and should engage in the future. Many of our international friends are having a parallel conversation along these lines. As Americans and Europeans observe the D-Day anniversary, an enduring symbol of commitment to freedom, it was jarring to see a somewhat tattered eagle on The Economist's cover, asking whether America would fight for anything anymore. In Europe and in this vitally important region, such questions make little sense. The United States is a leading member of NATO, a fact underscored by the President last week in Warsaw, and has treaty obligations to defend our allies. We continue to maintain the world's largest defense budget. Similar questions have been raised by some in this neighborhood about the U.S. commitment to this region. However, U.S. defense cooperation with the countries of this region has never been stronger. In fact, it has dramatically expanded in recent years. The U.S. has 35,000 military personnel in the Gulf region. I visited the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet a few weeks ago in Bahrain, where we station about 7,000 personnel. The UAE is the fleet's most frequent port of call as it patrols the Gulf. Our military is deployed with our most advanced fighter aircraft and a wide array of missile defense capabilities in this region. President Obama came to Saudi Arabia recently to directly reaffirm our commitment to regional security and partnership, and he has met many regional leaders in the White House. In addition to phone calls and meetings by senior civilians and military personnel, we are linked by high-level forums. The US-GCC Strategic Cooperation Forum at the foreign minister level and its counterpart, the US-GCC Defense Ministerial. Our diplomatic engagement in the region is as broad as it is deep. Our diplomats meet daily with government officials and civil society, and our senior leadership, particularly the Secretary, is in constant contact with his counterparts in the region. Despite increased security concerns, U.S. missions abroad will continue to do the important work of building ties and forging common purpose. The United States recognizes that there can be no durable solution to the range of challenges facing the region without the vital engagement of the countries of the Gulf. The U.S. is committed to maintaining the world's largest and best equipped military. As the President made clear in his recent West Point speech, when he said that the United States will use military force unilaterally if necessary, when our core interests demand it, when our people are threatened, when our livelihood is at stake, or when the security of our allies is in danger. A robust economic and diplomatic engagement will also remain a cornerstone of our relations in the Middle East. As we look around the region, however, we see important diplomatic and security challenges that will require more tailored strategies if we are to succeed. So it is important to take a clear-eyed look at our priorities and how all of us in the region can work together to preserve stability and build a better future. The United States seeks to make the world more secure by helping our allies and friends defend their national security interest and by intensifying our partnership. This is an approach that has been evolving over the years. Some of the greatest dangers now arise from efforts by violent extremists operating in areas where borders and territory cannot be defended by national governments. To assure their defenses, we have provided to our partners in this region some of the world's best military equipment. Saudi Arabia recently purchased 72 of the advanced F-15 aircraft. The UAE is upgrading and expanding an F-16 fleet. Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait are acquiring some of the world's most sophisticated missile defense systems. But having the best equipment available is not nearly enough. We are moving to support regional collective defense through the Gulf Cooperation Council. We maintain a combined air operations center here in Qatar that monitors the skies over the region. We are hoping that the GCC will establish an Air Defense Chiefs Conference as its primary military forum for regional air and missile defense policy. We would like to see improved security cooperation in the Straits of Hormuz through the GCC Operations Center once it is operational. We believe the GCC should assume and maintain command of the Combined Maritime Forces Gulf operations, with the Naval Chiefs Conference to coordinate policy. From the UAE and Qatar's contributions to the no-fly zone of Libya, to the GCC participation in counter-piracy operations in the Arabian Sea, we are beginning to see what our enhanced security partnership can achieve as Gulf countries are becoming increasingly robust military partners. Although the terrorism which emerged from this region has been effectively ended as a unified force in Afghanistan, various splinter groups and factions still seek to undermine and overthrow regional governments. But we have seen the consequences of permitting violent extremists to establish safe havens or to take over entire nations, and the enormous cost of turning back the tide. In his recent speech at West Point, President Obama pointed to violent extremist elements as the greatest threat to the United States and to our interests and partners. He committed the United States to work in partnership with countries across the globe as a network or web of allies to confront extremist violence. Nowhere is this more true in Syria and Iraq. I believe we can do much together to contain and roll back the threat posed by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant's aspirations to create a terrorist state in western Iraq and eastern Syria. ISIL draws on the widespread anger in the region and beyond over the Assad regime's brutal repression of its people, repression supported by Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. To defeat ISIL, the United States and countries of the region need to work in concert and overcome some differences to develop effective policies and durable solutions to this dangerous threat. Counterterrorism strategies sometimes require the use of military power, but we must also use other tools, including diplomacy and development, to take on the appeal that terrorists can still have for angry, disenfranchised, and unemployed young people. And as allies, we need to strengthen our business and people-to-people ties. The second related challenge is job creation. This region has a very large cohort of young people who are driving change with their aspirations for better lives. But there will be no stability in this region until the large numbers of unemployed young men can find good jobs, the kinds of opportunities that young people everywhere seek. Observers of the recent Egyptian election noted that they saw very few young men at the polls, another indicator of the disillusionment and frustration with the political process that we see across the entire region. Improving the prospects of young people will require increased investment, more open markets, more intra-regional trade, and critically, more cooperation among the Gulf countries and Europe and the United States. This cooperation will be crucial to finding ways to help less prosperous Arab countries develop productive, job-creating investments. Some work has been done to synchronize our overall economic approach to the region, but not nearly enough. The Gulf countries will continue to be vulnerable as less prosperous neighbors face stagnant economies and declining living standards. On our part, we in developed countries need to open our markets just as we work closely with our business communities to invest in the region, since overseas markets offer our companies the greatest opportunities for growth and profit. Prosperity will require widespread reform of Arab economies to depend less on subsidies, to slow the growth in public employment, and to curb energy demand. Secretary Kerry has worked hard to lay the basis for an improved Palestinian economy, predominantly using the private sector, but engaging government tools selectively. This innovative plan, which is private sector driven, may provide a model for other countries in the region and will be greatly strengthened by support from the Gulf states. Higher education is a prime area for increased cooperation because both in the Arab world and in the United States, costly but advanced education raises the expectations of young people for a better life, expectations thwarted when they cannot find jobs. The United States has the best universities in the world, and some of these institutions are now operating in the Middle East. And U.S. degree programs are attracting growing numbers of people from across the region. There are currently 80,000 Saudi students in the U.S., a number poised to increase to over 100,000 next year, representing an investment of about $4 billion by the Saudi government. This stake in human capital will transform Saudi society, and it will develop deep partnerships and business ties for Saudi Arabia with a new generation of Americans. Countries in this region also need to cooperate more on developing specialized high schools, vocational training, and expertise in math and science, both for girls and boys. Our cooperation in education and in important academic and professional exchanges will help build stronger ties between our people and will dispel misunderstandings. And then finally, political stability in the region will be a significant challenge. The United States is well aware that there are deep differences among our friends in this region about the future of Islamist politics, and we understand the need for new thinking to address the intensity and depth of sectarian issues that threaten regional peace. It will be an important theme of discussion at this conference. We have seen Islamist groups prosper when they provide services that governments have been unable to provide, and when there has been a lack of political space for other political movements. Some people in this region conflate Islamists with terrorists and desire to eliminate the Islamists entirely from the political scene. Our difficult fight against violent extremists is made more complicated by this viewpoint. The need for compromise is underscored by political experience in the Arab world as well as our own. It will take concerted leadership on the part of political leaders, governments, religious figures, and civil society, leadership that must come from people here in this region. Finally, I want to mention some U.S. diplomatic undertakings that are underway in the region, addressing challenges that also require our shared efforts if we are to build a region of peace and stability. I know that most of you have been following these issues closely. Let me offer a few thoughts. The United States desires better relations with Iran. We want to believe President Rouhani's efforts to improve relations with the West are both sincere and sustainable within Iran's political structure. Our differences with Iran go far beyond the nuclear issue, yet in clear recognition of the existential threat that an Iranian nuclear weapon poses to this region and to the United States, we are working together with the P5+1 to test Iran's intentions. We have provided temporary, limited, and reversible sanctions relief in exchange for a partial rollback of Iran's nuclear program as a demonstration of our sincerity and desire to complete an agreement. We have been keeping regional governments closely and regularly briefed throughout the process. I cannot say with any certainty that these negotiations will succeed, but we must continue to seek a diplomatic solution to a dangerous situation. We believe that efforts to address regional challenges will be strengthened by a close partnership with Egypt. We look forward to working with President al-Sisi and his government to advance our strategic partnership and our many shared interests. A strong, stable, and economically successful Egypt is good for the region and good for the United States. We continue to urge that the Egyptian government follow through on its commitment to lead an inclusive transition to a democracy that respects the universal rights of all its citizens, including the right to peacefully dissent, and an open economy that provides opportunities for growth and development. The Assad regime, which terrorizes and slaughters its own people and drives them into exile, has given new life to violent extremism in this region. While it has had some battlefield successes, the regime will not be able to end the civil uprising through the use of force and repression, nor will it gain legitimacy from its recent bogus election. We will continue to work with our London 11 partners toward a political solution that will facilitate serious transition. In his recent West Point address, President Obama underscored our desire to support the moderate Syrian opposition, which offers the best alternative to both the regime and the terrorists. He noted that we will coordinate with our partners and allies to increase that support. The President also intends to increase our assistance to Syria's neighbors to deal with the refugees and terrorist spillover from the conflict. But this crisis requires all of us to work together, putting our partnership into practice. We need to cut off the flow of resources and fighters from this region to ISIL and other extremist groups, and we will need to expand security cooperation to strengthen defenses and borders. The United States remains the largest donor to the international humanitarian effort for the Syrian people. Last week, the Secretary of State visited Lebanon, which has been deeply affected by the Syrian crisis, where he announced an initial $290 million in humanitarian assistance, bringing the U.S. total to over $2 billion. The Middle East peace negotiations are currently in a period of pause as Israel and the Palestinians reflect on the next steps necessary to secure the peace agreement that has eluded them for so many decades. Secretary of State Kerry expended extraordinary efforts to restart and to shepherd these talks, and we are grateful that the Brookings Institution loaned Ambassador Martin Indyk back to the State Department to work closely with both parties. I want to acknowledge the support for these talks provided by so many of the region's leaders, including incentives for the parties to reach a solution. Regrettably, both sides have taken steps that have brought the talks to the current pause. The United States will not and cannot give up trying to achieve a just and lasting peace in the region. In conclusion, I'll say that though the U.S. combat role in Afghanistan is coming to an end, we see much productive work ahead, not just on shared security concerns, but also on building stronger economic, political, and cultural ties. Achieving these goals will depend heavily on our partnerships in the region and require expanded cooperation and intensive consultation. This forum is an opportunity to propose and develop solutions to the challenges we face, and I look forward to a very fruitful discussion. President Obama has spoken often about America's desire to build a new relationship with the countries of the region based on mutual respect, cooperation, and economic development. We have done much in recent years to deepen our business and commercial relations, and the surge of Arab students currently entering U.S. universities will do much to broaden people-to-people engagement and also to share new skills in technology and entrepreneurship. But much more can be done in part because we believe that every society, regardless of its religious or cultural traditions, benefits from extending universal rights to all men and women. The Middle East has entered a new era, one in which the demands of people for greater access to legitimate political power and economic opportunity are growing. These demands will not go away. We are looking for ways to align ourselves more effectively politically and economically with the Middle East as a long-term partner for peace and economic growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we can just
Sit down.
these chairs right here. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tamara Kaufman-Wittes. I'm the director of the Saban Center for Middle East Policy at Brookings, and I'm really delighted to be up here with Ambassador Ann Patterson, with whom I had the pleasure of working at the State Department. And she has very generously agreed to have a little conversation between the two of us up here before she is compelled to leave us and continue with her official meetings. And Ambassador Patterson, let me start with one of the issues that you dealt with toward the end of your remarks. And I note your statement that the United States sees this region as a long-term partner. that it wants its ties in the region to go beyond military and security affairs and get to the people-to-people level. And yet, as you noted, there are threats that are proliferating. Syria perhaps generating some of the most dangerous threats to the region, to regional order, and over the long term to American interests. So perhaps let me start with a question that I imagine many people in this room might be asking. Why hasn't the United States been willing to do more to support the armed opposition against Bashar al-Assad?
Well, I think that tomorrow, Tammy,
Just push the button.
the United States has done a great deal to support the opposition against Bashar al-Assad and done a great deal to contain the crisis from Syria from having an even worse effect on its neighbors. I certainly do not want to come here and underestimate particularly the threat of terrorism in eastern Syria and western Iraq, which has become very acute, particularly the threats in Iraq right now. But we have furnished the armed opposition with very considerable support in the past 2 years. There are other projects underway. As you know, the President referred in his West Point speech to a new $5 billion counterterrorism fund, much of which will be directed at this region. But in the final analysis, there is only a political solution in Syria. There's some of the leaders of the Syrian opposition here with whom I met in Egypt, but the only solution is a political one. So we have to work toward that through the UN, through the London 11, through the participation of international partners.
Thank you. You mentioned the $5 billion counterterrorism partnership fund that President Obama announced in his speech the other week. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that fund will be composed of? How will it be allocated? Is it just for security cooperation, or are there other forms of programs that will be embedded in it?
We're still working a lot of that out, and as Tamara knows, within the U.S. government there'll be a lot of competition for resources of that fund. But again, most of it, or a good portion of it, will be directed at this region. And of course, as we heard the president of Mali speak earlier, some of the terrorist threats in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa and northern Africa are also quite acute. So I would expect a significant portion of that fund to be directed at those challenges.
And of course, from your experience in Colombia, you know how those investments in counterterrorism and stabilization can take a long time to pay off, and they have to have a civilian component as well if they're going to succeed. I think listening to you lay out a vision for greater intra-regional trade, greater American investment, business-to-business ties, educational cooperation, it harks back to some of the intentions that the Obama administration laid out at the very beginning of its time in office in the Cairo speech. And yet, we're in an era in the United States where it's harder to persuade members of Congress and even the American public to make those kinds of investments. You've served in a lot of places that have had the benefit of American partnership and assistance. You've been up to Congress probably countless times making the case for this kind of investment. Can you tell us a little bit about the environment politically for investing in a partnership with the Middle East?
Well, let me be frank, the environment in Congress is difficult. And you can tell that simply by turning on your TV on any given day. And the environment for foreign assistance is also difficult. One, because we are just coming out of a recession, and two, because I think there's often a lack of support for foreign assistance on the Hill. But I think there is support for increased educational cooperation and increased cooperation through trade and investment. And I think perhaps which has vastly more potential than whatever we can achieve by foreign assistance. I think we need to do a better job in our Congress of promoting the virtues of expanded trade, of increased foreign investment, two ways. The investment is a two-way street, and countries like Qatar have done much to invest in the U.S. So that has to be our focus over the long term, not just foreign assistance.
And are you engaged in outreach to the U.S. private sector on this too?
We are, and the Chamber of Commerce has done a lot, among other business groups, to improve our dialogues, I think, discussions in this area, and again, to promote the sort of economic reforms that we need to see in this region, which I think it would make it easier for American companies to invest in this region over the long term.
Now, you mentioned a very interesting point in your remarks that in the Egyptian elections, some of the observers noted how few young men came to the polls. And the challenge of taking this rising generation, which represents more than half of the region, and making space for them, both economically and politically. It seemed to me that in many ways, that anecdote showed the connection between economic inclusion and political inclusion for young people.
Yes, one of my colleagues who was an observer, this isn't empirical data, but he went to observe the elections, and he saw a large number of middle-aged women, and he ascribed this to a law and order vote, which I think is probably correct in the Egyptian context. And he saw lots of Islamist-looking people as well voting, and some young women. But he said the polls were virtually devoid of young men. And this would be consistent with what other polls tell us and what we sort of know from our own observation, that this huge youth bulge of unemployed young men is not just unique to Egypt. Actually, Egypt is probably somewhat better off than many other countries. This strikes me as the biggest challenge that this region faces is job creation and employment opportunities for this large number of young men that are coming to working age. We just have to find a solution to it. If we don't have a solution, we're going to see political instability as far as the eye can see.
And from your own experience, and I guess I'll end here, and I know that we'll talk about this in the panel that is following on from these remarks, but it's a challenge for the United States in this environment where there's so much change in the region, and as you said, a lot of disagreements within the region about how to handle these issues. So how do you, in your work today, try to balance that outreach to young people, to business groups, to civil society organizations, with the government-to-government work that you have to do every day?
Well, I think we're increasingly making a priority of business outreach. And as Tamara knows well, the role of civil society in this region has been very conflicted, for want of a better word. And we need to do a much better job of helping to preserve the space for civil society in this region, because this is obviously a really important factor in any sort of political and economic development going forward. So we're trying to increase our outreach to businesses and religious groups and civil society in the region, as well as maintain our contacts with traditional government. I've never seen a Secretary of State so much in contact with leaders of the region as Secretary Kerry has been. He is in daily contact. I would hazard to say that not a day goes by that he isn't on the phone with some leader in this region of the world, and often many leaders in this region of the world. So he has been very active in reaching out to the leadership here and keeping them informed about what we're doing across an entire range of issues.
Well, Ambassador Patterson, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us and share your views on behalf of Secretary Kerry and on behalf of the Brookings Institution, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.